Thank you. That was a terrific start to the morning, and I'm glad to be here with you today to continue the session. Um, I'm going to go, I think, really quite from the general to the specific in my remarks this morning. Um, I think that the topic I'm going to be talking about is something that I've certainly heard over the past couple of days that there's a fair bit of interest and chatter on, and a lot of it has to do with what the government proposed in this April's budget, as well as in the 2023 budget, particularly with regard to the increase in the capital gains inclusion rate. So let me slides here. This is the mandatory disclaimer, which I'll let you read. So I think a lot of people at this conference are familiar with who PearTree is, but I'm going to just give you a little bit of information because it's important to understand how much we're a huge part of the flow-through share market, and the data that I'm going to share with you really comes from dealing with so much of that market directly. So we are Canada's leading provider of exploration financing using the charity flow-through format. Founded in 2007, since that time we've seen a transformation of the capital raising for exploration funding, moving from what we had referred to as traditional flow-through financing to the charity flow-through format. We raise in the range of $500 million annually in flow-through share financing, and that represents the majority of the funding raised on Canadian stock exchanges for exploration. We've completed over 700 transactions, and we're proud to be supporters of over 5,000 charities through the format that we use. So what I'm going to talk about today, leading into, as I said at the outset, comments on the implications of the 2024 and 2023 federal budget measures, is to start off to tell you a little bit about what the flow-through market really looks like. I don't know that people necessarily appreciate where funding is coming from. Then I will talk a little bit about alternative minimum tax and the capital gains inclusion rate, and how the most recent federal budget and the previous one are impacting those two things, and particularly the impacts on the mineral exploration sector. And there are a couple of current issues that I want to touch on at the end of my presentation. For anybody that does finance using flow-through funds, I think these are some important things to make sure that you're aware of as we move forward. So the slide that you see up on the screen right now breaks down the sources of funding through equity raises on Canadian exchanges for Canadian exploration. So the aggregate of those bars is all equity raised for exploration on Canadian exchanges. The top lighter colored portion is the non-flow-through portion. So as you can see, the trend or the pattern has been pretty consistent in that flow-through financing funds most exploration in Canada, and has been going back more than 10 years that the slide covers. The really interesting trend that you can see when you look at that dotted line on the slide is that the proportion of flow-through financing that's done as charity flow-through financing has increased dramatically over the past decade. And in 2023, the statistics we have show that almost 90% of all flow-through financing was done as a charity arrangement. So when you put all that stuff on that chart together, what we see for the most recent year is that 83% of all money raised for exploration has been raised using flow-through shares. Of that, 89% is using the charity flow-through format. So about 3/4 of all money raised for exploration in Canada is charity flow-through. Now, this is where things start to get a little bit more interesting in relation to government policy and the measures introduced in the last two federal budgets. We have data from CRA, the most recent being from 2021, which aggregates on an anonymous basis information from taxpayers, and specifically what taxpayers are deducting as their Canadian exploration expense, and what credits they're accessing as flow-through share subscribers. So in 2021, based on this data, 88%, over $1 billion of all flow-through funding, was provided by 14,400 taxpayers earning $250,000 or more, averaging $74,000 per subscriber. When we look at PearTree's own clients, that's about half of that full amount, which is a pretty good sample, obviously. What we find is that the average purchase of flow-through shares is almost $240,000, which translates into only about 2,100 people in the entire country providing almost half of the flow-through funding in Canada, with the remaining 12,000 or so taxpayers who are buying flow-through shares purchasing an average of $45,000 in a year. If you break that down by province and territory, it's not surprising that most of the money is spent in Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia, which is a good proxy of where the money is being spent, although a flow-through share subscriber in one province may put money into flow-through shares that's spent in another province, but I think that, you know, it's still a pretty good indication. So then, again, looking across the provinces, those three main jurisdictions, in each case, approximately 90% of flow-through funding is being provided by really a handful of Canadians earning $250,000 or more. So with the information that I've just shared with you, we can analyze a little bit in terms of what the likely impact of the recent tax changes and tax proposals by the federal government mean for exploration funding. So I'm going to start, there's really two main things. I'm going to start with alternative minimum tax, or AMT, even though I think most of the conversation seems to be about capital gains rates. AMT is a parallel calculation that applies to high income earning Canadians, and it's intended to make sure that those who could otherwise use not just flow-through share deductions and credits, but whatever is available in terms of deductions and credits in the Income Tax Act to drive their income down to virtually nil for tax purposes. So this parallel calculation is done, and taxpayers are required to pay the higher of either their regular tax or the alternative minimum tax under this calculation. And what AMT does is it limits or denies various deductions and credits to arrive at this other higher number. In 2023, the budget proposed certain changes which included, other than in the usual case for non-flow-through shares anyway, the donation of publicly listed securities could be done free of capital gains tax. The proposal was to increase or introduce a 30% inclusion rather than have a capital gains free donation. And also there was a disallowance of 50% of many other deductions and credits, including charitable tax credits. In April 2024, the federal government announced that the proposed AMT changes would be implemented with retroactive effect to January 1st, 2004. The original proposals in 2023 weren't changed very much. They did, I think with a fair bit of lobbying from the charitable sector, revise the proposal to deny half of the charitable donation claims for tax purposes and moved that up to 80%. But there weren't really too many significant changes, and in terms of the potential negative impact on exploration financing, didn't really move the dial. And then, of course, in April, we had the introduction or the announcement of an increase in the capital gains inclusion rate from 50% to 2/3. That was announced in the April budget to take effect on June 25th, which is, I think, 19 days from now. We do not have any draft legislation. There are, I think, quite a few ways in which the impact on this sector can be mitigated, but right now we haven't seen legislation. We don't even know whether we're going to see legislation before Parliament recesses for the summer, so obviously makes things very difficult in terms of planning. The really difficult thing for exploration financing, which, as you've seen, is largely sourced through flow-through shares, is that there's a phantom capital gain on flow-through shares. So I'm sure many people know, I guess in return for getting an immediate deduction when you purchase flow-through shares, your tax cost base is deemed to be nil. So if you buy flow-through shares for $100 and you sell them for $80 and you have an economic loss, you still have, under current rates, a $40 capital gain. You've got to find the cash to pay that tax somehow. And of course, the proposal is to increase the 50% rate to 2/3. For individuals, we do have a $250,000 threshold. So until you hit that $250,000 point, you still are only including 50% of the gain for tax purposes. Unfortunately for private companies in Canada, there is no such threshold before the higher rate kicks in, at least as the measures have been proposed so far. And that's a real problem, which I think many people don't really appreciate, because there's a very, very significant proportion of flow-through shares that are now purchased by Canadian-controlled private companies. And with the change in the rate, the impact on those subscribers is really going to push a lot of them right out of the market, because they are buying almost exclusively for donation purposes, and the way these changes impact them will basically eliminate them from the market. So when we put all those things together, estimates are as high as 75% reduction in available capital. A lot of that comes from the fact that corporations wouldn't really be participating. And the really unfortunate thing, and there've been a lot of submissions to government since the budget, and I hope they're listening, is that the federal government has done some really positive things in terms of incentivizing more exploration in Canada, particularly when it comes to critical minerals. And as much as we're hearing lots of announcements about battery manufacturing and electric vehicles and all that, it all starts with finding it in the ground and getting it out of the ground. And it's concerning that something like the critical minerals exploration tax credit that we saw have a huge impact in funding is, I think, really going to potentially be undermined by these changes. I'm not going to go through the numbers, but we did try to do some number crunching and analyze the impact for individual subscribers. And these just illustrate how somebody who would be our typical client trying to achieve the same thing really with the charitable donation objective, how much flow-through shares would they be able to buy before these changes I've been discussing and after without having to pay alternative minimum tax. And you can see that the reduction is generally in the 30% and higher range. And that doesn't even take into account that actually the cost to them would be higher, so that could be have a further dampening effect. And then you layer on top of that the fact that corporations are basically out of this marketplace. So that's where those estimates of as high as 70% reduction come from. I think it's it's still not completely out of the question that we'll see some changes when the legislation is introduced. So I'm pretty optimistic, and one way or the other, the market will settle, and unfortunately, we may find that the premiums that issuers of flow-through shares have been able to command may decrease. But we've made some proposals, as well as some others, industry organizations and a few others, which we think will hopefully significantly mitigate the potential impacts that I've described. Lastly, I just have a few seconds left. I did want to just raise a couple of things that I think people should just keep in mind as we go forward when it comes to flow-through share financing. One is that unfortunately the federal government did not make any changes as a result of people that were unable to complete their exploration plans due to wildfires, and something completely beyond their control. So just bear in mind that you got to plan for all these contingencies, because we're not getting the relief that the government did provide during COVID when people couldn't get to site. The second is, if you're doing a critical minerals exploration project and you're planning on being able to provide the 30% critical minerals exploration tax credit, there is a certificate that has to be filed with CRA prior to starting the work, prior to the subscription agreements being entered into. And if you don't cover all potential projects that you're going to spend the money on, CRA is taking the view that you can't change where you spend the money midstream. So that can also catch you off guard. And the final thing that I'm going to mention is that before interest rates increase the way that they have, Part 12.6 tax, which is essentially interest on flow-through money raised in a particular year, if you haven't spent it by the end of February in the following year, was not much of anything for people to be concerned about. But the rate that's being charged by CRA now it's at least 6%, but I think it may be actually a bit higher than that, on the unspent amount that you carry forward from March to the end of the second, or the year after you raise the flow-through funding. So it is like a significant number now. So again, in budgeting for the use of flow-through share proceeds, keep that in mind.